Yes, so I'm newly resituated in Newfoundland, and I just made a quick slide to show the international audience where that is, because I've had a lot of questions about that. And it's at Memorial University, which is abbreviated to MUN. So let me now get started. I'm reading off my phone because I can't find my printer. um, So the increasing ubiquity of digital archives, the ever-growing scale of digitization projects, and the shortage of space and funding for labor are contributing to the development and uptake of new mass digitization technologies. Such technologies created for the management of big data, information assets too large and varied to be handled by conventional means, promise to parse and manage data in ways beyond the capacity of traditional methods. Such technological interventions, premised in automated and frequently artificial intelligence or AI-based and algorithmic functions, and designed and implemented with somewhat utopian aims to take the place of paid human labor in the face of dwindling institutional budgets, promise to hold and handle the large, often banal task of sorting through vast swaths of digital materials to extract materials of relative significance while relegating those deemed unnecessary to the dustbin. In this short talk, which represents a brief description of a recent foray into examining the role of digital automated processes in the organization, management, and preservation of both physical and born digital materials in the Artists' Archive for a larger project on digital feminist approaches to artists' archives, I first look at exactly what functions are being offloaded to machines in the uptake of personal archives, and then consider the implications of these practices, especially in relation to the kinds of information being discarded within these technological contexts. I ask, what is lost to these processes and practices? What kinds of information are at risk of being lost from collections, particularly in the collections of marginalized creators or in smaller institutions' archives, if we begin to rely predominantly on AI and other technological interventions to parse and sort through records and other junk materials such as spam, email, and other commonplace media in a media artist's archive or in a visual artist's archive or any form of artist, really. Importantly, is there an analog between these new digital practices and what is traditionally eliminated from an archive? Archives and their roles as sites that bridge past and future are being reflexively activated in new ways that call attention to the intricacies of the content and contexts of collections. Archives and archival studies are undergoing conceptual and organizational renovations that follow dynamic feminist materialist logics that evolve and adapt according to the situation and positionality of unique collections and their situations, conditions, and networks of community relations. These new feminist archival methods, platforms, and attitudes are derived from the intersectional histories and innovations of feminist archival studies. And I don't really get into this, but it's a burgeoning field, and it's quite contemporary. They attentively incorporate and influence the production of new archival technologies that respond to the changing needs of collections, archivists, publics, and communities represented. I think that some of the papers today have also addressed a lot of these practices directly and indirectly. In a full-length article in progress, I think through the fate of what is being systemically left out of archives in these emergent cultural memory environments. I take as case studies the complex multi-institutional archives and collections of two late women artists, Canadian multimedia artist Joyce Wieland and UK activist photographer Jo Spence, and consider the delicate material relations of collections, what they come to represent when the artists they stand in for are gone, and the broader issues at stake when artists' archives in all their contemporary precarity might begin to take up AI-based methods out of institutional necessity. And again, I'm gesturing to this article in progress that I can't really address in a 10-minute paper. I contemplate in this article and analyze my previous and ongoing conversations with archivists working with Wieland's and Spence's materials. I consider the value of the mundane material traces of the everyday in the media artist's archive and in the interdisciplinary artist's archive. I think about how innovative practices in digital archives currently obfuscate what I'm calling junk data that points to aspects of an artist's private life and subjective experience, and consider how mass digital methods might address and reconceptualize the relationship between an archival collection and what is most often discarded. In her 2022 article, More Data, Less Process, a user-centered approach to email and born digital archives, published in the American Archivist Journal, UK-based digital humanities scholar Lise Jaillant examines emerging uses of machine learning-based big data management in digital archives. Jaillant's article takes up the earlier arguments of Mark A. Green and Dennis Meissner in their 2005 article, More Product, Less Process, in the same journal, where the authors made the radical argument, or the then radical argument, for the ethical need to open up or under-processed archives wholesale to researchers despite the availability of messy, sensitive, and or problematic materials. This approach, later known as MPLP, was taken up and canonized in contemporary archival practices and scholarship, and is likely quite familiar to most contemporary archivists. MPLP was developed as an alternative to the custodial tradition in archives, wherein archivists directly oversaw and were responsible for the content of collections on sort of a more granular level. Jaillant, acknowledging the rightful critiques of MPLP in relation to issues of privacy and the principles of community knowledge, reconsiders the way such workflows can be reimagined in the current technological moment, wherein labor constraints might no longer figure the same way, and where archival materials are ever more prolific. She surmises, what we now need is a user-centered approach to born digital archives, more data, less process, and a more liberal attitude to risk. Following the digital and archival turns, arts and cultural organizations are transforming the ways their publics are interacting with their archives and special collections. Professionals in the GLAM sectors, and here I mean, and many are probably familiar, galleries, libraries, archives, and museums, are working with computer scientists and digital humanities specialists to develop and improve computational methods for the creation of accessible and comprehensive digital archives. Jaillant's recent studies of the capacities and effects of mass digitization technologies and AI extend from and interconnect with other recent conversations in critical digital humanities and archives around the transformations of tech interventions in the digital historical record. And here's one that I think is quite important. In her 2019 book, The Politics of Mass Digitization, data scholar Nana Bond-Hilstrup argues that mass digitization presents a new political cultural memory paradigm, noting how we need to approach mass digitization projects not as a continuation of the existing politics of cultural memory or as purely technical endeavors, but rather as emerging socio-political and socio-technical phenomena that have introduced new forms of cultural memory politics. And I think this term socio-political and socio-technical really point to the sort of human aspect of these emerging cultural memory politics. These ideas put into question the kinds of information prioritized, what needs to be managed, accessed, and preserved, and what can and will be forgotten or eliminated under this emerging digital archival regime, in spite of the evolving episteme. We are thereby left to wonder about the fate, status, and characterization of this junk data, this, what will be eliminated under these new cultural memory regimes. In my previous research in the archives of Whelan and Spence, whose archival legacies continue to be very complicated and dynamic, much of what I have encountered in the collections is actively mediated by archivists specializing in their management. Complicated collaborative decisions have been carefully made about what is kept and what is jettisoned. These decisions are frequently not categorical or prescriptive. In short, communities of labor and practice remain key to the well-being of archives. Standards, pragmatic and abstract, are meaningfully shaped by the human knowledge of workers responsible for realizing them. Intimate collection-specific knowledge communities specializing in the details of what is filed and kept and what is not are an aspect of archival management that needs to be taken into account as technological interventions are developed. Importantly, archivists and other archive workers carry with them the narratives of the formation of collections. The processing of born digital collections that is currently described and undertaken neglects to account for the human fingerprints that imbue objects and stories with anecdotes, often networked across collections and institutions. And these important but often invisible elements of artists' archives need to be preserved alongside the more concrete parts of digital collections. There is still a key custodial role for archivists in archives, and this role shapes collections and influences their function in scholarship and education. The conversations being led by humanities, AI, and digital archival scholars are currently unfolding and are actively prioritized in contemporary research schemas because their significance is undeniable, particularly when it comes to the future and sustainability of archives. Ongoing conversations around care as it relates to management and preservation in the archive frequently intersect with those focused on technological interventions, but not, as we might guess, in all circles. Care, ethical management, and preservation in analog archival formats and environments can be translated to digital contexts as long as the evolving attitude to risk in the tradition of MPLP does not mean evacuating information future scholars and communities might require entirely, particularly as cultural memory politics evolve in tandem with the emergent episteme. The status of junk data remains indeterminate, but the banal, everyday aspects of data have value even when we do not yet recognize or foreground the nature of its significance. And I missed a slide, and here's my thank you. I apologize, I did kind of cut a bunch of sections to make this into a 10-minute paper, so hopefully I kept relatively to time. And I thank everyone very much for attending, and my fellow panelists and organizers and host for all of their labor. Thank you.